Welcome to Inspiring Possible. I'm Christy Pennison, former stuck person turned therapist and dream consultant. Are you feeling stuck, overwhelmed, uncertain, or just need a little inspiration? Then I want to help you gain the clarity, confidence, and courage to create possibilities and live a life you love. Because, folks, life's too short to be miserable.
Hello, inspiring possible people. We are so excited to have you back listening today because I'll be honest with you. Y'all probably hear me say this all the time that I get excited about guests and we have special guests. But the guest today that we have, just kind of like looking at her story and hearing a little bit about her story before we had her on, um, personally, I'm excited to talk with her because if you have ever been somebody who you feel like maybe your life kind of put there are obstacles or adversity that came in your way that you feel like maybe has derailed you from being able to really achieve some of the things you might have on your heart and your mind, or maybe just life happens and it's unexpected and you're finding yourself being able trying to figure out ways to move through that to be able to create possibilities for yourself, which is what this podcast is all about, then you came to the right place today because I have an incredible guest who has had her own share of adversity, but has really made some incredible things happen along the way. And is also really about making sure that it authentically aligns not only with whoever she's leading, but in life as well. So I'm really excited to welcome Shirin Behzadi to the show. Welcome.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, okay. So tell me how, because I know you recently have a book that's out, The Unexpected CEO, but let's just dive right on in. And if you don't mind, tell me a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Of course. I was born and raised in Iran to a loving family. I am the youngest of five children. So it was a busy household and it was filled with a lot of movement and a lot of love. The environment that I grew up in my early years was normal. Everything was kind of like pretty reasonable, pretty normal. Until the revolution happened. And when the revolution happened, I was still a child. I was a preteen. With it, it brought a lot of chaos. What I saw, and many did, was violence on the streets and atrocities, and just a sense of safety was gone suddenly, which is very unsettling, of course, especially for a child.
Because you were probably like, and you said preteen age.
Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
yes. And to witness those images and also feeling like the environment wasn't safe because when the government changed, there was a lot of chaos. There were young boys on the streets with machine guns and they pretended like they were the guard. Of course, they were the guard, but they had no training. And, you heard of people being arrested and in jail and executed and all of that. Very close to home for me. In fact, it was stunning how quickly rights were taken away. Rights were taken away from everybody, especially with women. The fact that we now had to wear the hijab, which some people traditionally had done, but most women didn't. And I definitely I didn't grow up in that environment, that it was literally beaten into us that we had to. And it wasn't really about what we wore, it was about taking away rights. So, coupled with that was this lack of safety. And couple of times I was arrested. One time I was arrested literally walking on the street because I guess they just didn't like the way I looked. And a second time I was arrested because we were traveling and they found a book in my suitcase, which was a no no. Kind of interesting because I've only reflected on this recently. I'm like, and I wrote a book. So it's interesting how
Yeah.
years after,
Full
decades
circle.
after I
Full
actually wrote
circle. Yeah.
a book. Between those two things, it looked like I was in danger. And this was also the era where there was a war in Iran. Iraq had invaded Iran. So when you're in the midst of that war, it doesn't matter that it's just Iran and Iraq. To you, it feels like World War III because you hear sirens, you go into the basement, you hear bombings, all of that. With all of that, it seemed like, to me, it seemed like overnight, my parents decided that I had to leave. I had just turned 17 and I had graduated high school. And I believe they thought it was safer for me and also that I would be best off pursuing a life outside of that environment. So they put me on my mom's passport and I had to discreetly pack all I had in a suitcase and say bye to everything I knew. I said bye to my father, to my sibling, to my friends and family, and left. I left with my mom to Istanbul, Turkey, because that was the neighboring country. There, my mom found me a home that had a room for 3 girls, and then she left me there. So here I was, having never been away from my family. Now, all of a sudden, at 17, I was in a foreign country. I didn't speak the language. I had no contacts. There was like no cell phones, right? Then I didn't have a lot of money. I didn't even have a passport. And to make matters worse, the woman that had the home turned on us. So in time, food was scarce, and then we weren't even allowed to shower with running water. We had to use buckets. I don't remember exactly how, but I do recall that in time there was a fork in the road as if, and I decided that I was going to take the road that had hope in front of it. So I thought, I am going to find my way out. Nothing wrong with Istanbul, Turkey, but where I stayed, there was definitely lots wrong. And I wanted to pursue my education. I decided that I was going to use all the resources I had, learn from people, and find my way. And I wanted to find my way to the United States for a number of reasons. I had been here before. United States is the place to be for opportunity, all of that. Through lots of stories that I share in my book, and I'm not going to belabor, I found my way to the United States. And I landed at LAX and I thought, well, now what? Right? I still didn't have parents. I still didn't have a lot of money. I needed to find my way through life. So I started working at a gas station to survive. I worked as a cashier at a bulletproof booth. It was not a nice area. And I would have the worst shifts. And there, well, sometimes I felt sorry for myself. I remember really well one time thinking I was so unfortunate that even at my young age, I had been through so much. And little by little, though, again, hope came about. And I thought, well, maybe I'm unfortunate, but also maybe I am fortunate because now I can build something. And that shifted things for me. I started really thinking about envisioning that someday I was going to run a big company. And Chrissy, I literally said that out loud to people. I remember one time a gentleman came up to the cashier, and I was at the time going to school full time too, going to school full time and working at the gas station full time, and asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I told him that I was going to run a big company. He laughed and walked away, which makes sense. But to me, it was serious. Serious, so serious that I literally printed business cards for myself. Don't ask me where I got
Okay,
the money or
okay.
why
Let's talk about this. Okay, let's pause real quick. For those of y'all who are listening, because I think this really is a powerful, because I mean, we haven't even heard the rest of your story, but I kind of like have a little bit of a knowledge of where this may be going. But at the same time, though, you had this vision. You were working at the gas station. Again, let's paint the picture. Bulletproof. You were in LA at this time. Is that right? So the sketchy part of LA, not the nice Beverly Hills side of LA. Okay. And
Mm-mm,
you are
no.
like so confident in this vision of what you had for yourself that you made business cards. I'm curious, what did they say? Was it like, what did you have on them?
It just said Shirin Behzadi and something like advisor or something like that because I thought
Okay.
that sounded good. Yes.
Okay. I
Didn't say
love this. So you
CEO, I
already
don't
said,
think.
I'm going to
But
believe in
I
this
don't
so
remember
much that this is how I'm going to put it out there. Yeah.
Yes, yes. There's something about that business card that's really sweet, and it comes full circle back later on in the book on a personal note, but there's significance to that business card. I think it was just something tangible that I could see, but the idea was this, that I uttered the words, and then those words became my knowing. I knew I was going to run a big company. So everything I did from that point on was informed with that being the case. Like, I am going to run a big company. That means essentially what it meant is that I aimed high, right? Somebody working at a gas station as a newcomer to the United States and, with a name that's not that well known, a woman, all of those may sound like not somebody you would necessarily think is positioned to run a big company. But that's the idea. It doesn't matter what traditionally people have done. It's we're all unique and we can create our own path. So I worked full time. I went to school full time. Speaking of aiming high, I changed majors from math to accounting because I thought it's the language of business. And when it was time to close to graduation, I decided if I'm going to graduate from accounting, I'm going to work for the Big Eight. Those were the Big Eight accounting firms back then. People told me because I went to a state school that wasn't really known for its business school, and probably didn't want me to be disappointed. They said, "Wow, they're not going to recruit from here, not much. So don't don't be disappointed." And this is where I used a principle that I've applied since. You can hear people out, probably should hear people out, but you don't have to listen to them because they tell you about where they are, their potential limitations. And I'm like, nah, I think I'm going to go in. I'm going to go for it. So I did get one of the 8 internship positions for the entire greater LA area with EY, which is an amazing accomplishment. And so when I then graduated, I had an offer from all the Big Eight. So she wasn't right. She wasn't right. And that's the essence of it. Just go for it. Just go for it. See where you land. There, I loved what I did. I grew up through the ranks and eventually decided that since I'm going to run a big company, and I had another very important core principle that started showing up. And that was if I were to be a mother, I wanted to be very engaged. And so at the time, life in public accounting didn't lend itself so much to that. Now, things are different now, but this is a long time ago. And so between the two, I thought it was time for me to leave, which was a very difficult decision.
Yeah, because it sounds like this was a goal that you had been working towards. Here you are, you've
Yeah.
had opportunity, you've been working maybe in one of these organizations for a minute, and you're like, okay, this is not aligning with maybe what I want my other life goals to be as well.
Yeah, it was scary and I literally sobbed about it, but I couldn't help it. It was time for me to move on. I did move on to one of the clients. There I learned a lot about operations. I moved up to CFO. In fact, I was pregnant, very pregnant, when I went in to ask to be the next CFO because the previous one was leaving. And that was another risky move. But hey, listen, I got it. It was a great experience. And there we eventually sold that bank to a larger bank. And then I thought, okay, so now I've been at EY. I had a good reputation there. I had been in my late 20s, I was a CFO of a good sized bank. We had $1 billion of loan servicing portfolio. I mean, it was good size. It would make sense. It would have made sense for me to find another CFO position, but I thought, nope, this is time to go out on my own and go out on my own to now we call it fractional CFO, but basically a CFO, an offsite CFO. That's when I cut my teeth on really getting to understand clients. And eventually I came across a client that was at the time relatively small. And that's where I stayed for the next 20 years. This is where I really decided it was an entrepreneurial environment and I thought it was the right place for me. It wasn't easy. The first few years we were barely making the growth happen. We did everything we could. We were really good partners together at trying to figure out how to best grow the company. It took a few years before we landed on what I call the secret sauce. From there, we started growing fast. We grew to another brand. Eventually, in 2013, I set out to find private equity partnership because we wanted to sell and move on. But I was successful at bringing a really good private equity partner. The condition of the sale was that I was going to stay and grow the company to the expectations that we had set forth. So when that transaction happened, everybody else, not everybody else, a lot of others at sea level had been bought out. So now all of a sudden we brought in private equity, and I'm pretty much all C levels: CEO, CIO, CFO, CMO, and COO all in one person. And
Yeah, you
that's
lost
in the
all your
next,
team.
yeah, yeah, a lot of them. And but what happened was that in the next few years, we now had the opportunity to really change and enhance all. So we basically left no stones unturned. We asked ourselves the question of who are we, where are we going, and refreshed everything. Created platforms, created technology platforms, marketing platforms. And so the company that we had grown for years up to that point, we better than doubled its value in a short 4 years. And as a result, by the time 2019 came about, it was clear that it was time for us to sell and exit. We were of, substantial size. Our franchisees were installing 70,000 units a week. So,
Oh, wow, that's incredible.
yes.
So it really kind of it's even almost seems like, one of the things that I'm hearing that, maybe is kind of a theme that I'm hearing in your story is not being afraid to put yourself out there and ask for what you want. Because even whether it would be asking, for that role of the CFO whenever you're like, "I'm pregnant, but I this person's about to be stepping down. I wanna go for this." Or whether it be like whenever you were in that kind of, I guess, a private equity partnership, being able to say, okay, everything we built just shifted, it sounded like pretty quickly, but how can we realign and grow
Mhm.
from here? And then to be able to, it sounds like exit at a really a high place where y'all really had even more substantial growth than you had ever had in the past. You just kinda kept
Yeah.
on. It sounds like do you feel like that's one of your strengths is, like, just to ask for what you want?
Yeah, I don't know if I've asked for what I want as much throughout my life as now, upon reflection, I could have done even more. But I do
Okay.
think that confidence in knowing what I have, or even in the case of private equity, what the company has to offer, having confidence in that and then presenting it in a compelling way, it are reasons I think I did well and the company did well. In fact, what I do want to say is that when we set out to find private equity partnership, it was a space that I wasn't quite familiar with. I hadn't used and or worked with private equity. I gave myself a while to learn the space. And I remember, well, at the time, I didn't know this, but I learned later that a very small percentage, single digit companies owned by private equity or backed by private equity are run by women. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that
Very small. Very. I don't know what the reasons are, but that's just a reality. The point is, I didn't let that reality affect me one way or another, right? Because my point of view was this was a great opportunity. I knew the company had potential. I knew we could grow it. I knew I had found the right partner, and then I went for it. So maybe the common thread, now that you mention it, is going for it regardless.
Yeah. Well, and then like you said, I think there's the also, belief, right? I think that's another thing that I hear from you, and I really loved how you said earlier in our conversation, like, there was a knowing, like, you just had a
Yeah.
knowing that this is where I'm headed towards, and it almost sounds like that you were able to do that as well within in the context of the company. It's like, I know, and it goes back to that confidence you said, that knowing of, like, this is something that really has the power to grow and scale. And also, I guess, finding the right partner, which I'm sure was a little bit challenging as well, because I'm sure not every private equity partner is created equal,
Mhm.
is what I would assume.
No, no.
Yeah.
Yes, you hit the nail on the head. I have since I've stepped down and I've been on my own. I've advised companies, I've been on boards of companies, I've done a bunch of speaking and so on. And I definitely promoted in my book. I love words like hope, dream, all of that are great. To me, what is the most powerful is knowing. Like it's already happened. I'm just taking the right steps to get there.
Yeah. What do you think? Do you think it was those early days of the knowing of just like when do you feel like you really settled into this knowing? Because it kind of sounds like it's been a theme along your journey, but what do you think helped you settle into this kind of knowing? Or do you think it just happened? Do you think it happened through yourself pushing yourself out there or
I think one point that I am very passionate about is that adversity is a great teacher. In fact, I say adversity is a superpower. The idea that as I was growing up in my young life, I had adversities that I faced, I went through, and I grew from, that created that sense of whether you call it confidence, resilience, whatever word you want to assign to it. I think facing smaller challenges, smaller adversities, and growing through and from them make you stronger, better for the bigger ones to come. So when, therefore, I'm challenged with something that seems lofty, I have more confidence to say, I know it's going to happen. It can't be any worse than it's happened in the past. I know it. I know it's going to happen. Right. I think that's the
yeah.
reason.
Yeah. So like adversity creates almost the confidence that you can move through because you have been through things, right? And you came out on the other side. And I don't know about you, but I do know that there's times in my life that if I can give myself enough time to reflect, then it does help me remember, like, this is nothing. Like, we can get through this. It doesn't mean that there isn't other things that happen, right? And listen, to be quite honest, I mean, I've never been in in my childhood, there was never a active war going on that was unexpected. So I have no context of what that might be and how much resilience that would be able to create in a person. But it almost sounds like even that at a very young age, and you having to be able to go through all of that uncertainty, and in that period of time in your life, it did almost just create this sense of like, okay, if I'm here, then I can keep going to there.
Yes, we all live different lives and we all have different backgrounds. But what I've learned, especially since I've been speaking at events and talking to folks, we have much more in common than meets the eye. And that's the human experience. Maybe my adversity is different than yours, or maybe the challenges and hurdles we each face are different, but facts remain, principles apply. And those principles are face the smaller ones. Yeah, I'm not dismissing that you've got to lick your wounds, right? I think sometimes something shows up that's really, really big and you have to take a moment and, you know, get sad, be upset, whatever you need to, and eventually find your way through it. So the more you do that, the better you become at it. And therefore, the bigger things that come in life, you have more of the ability to deal with them. At no other point in my life was that tested than when I had terminal illness. And I think that was a great teacher by itself.
And how old were you when that happened? And let's talk a little bit about that experience for you.
I definitely wasn't a child. I was in my early 40s. And we had with the company, we had faced the Great Recession. And the Great Recession was very much housing focused. And we were in home improvement. So it was a really difficult time for the company. We did learn a lot. I talk about that a lot in the book, how we adjusted every way we did business. We got better at it. So imagine we were still kind of recovering from that, where I got really sick. And, my son called 911. Long story short, come to find out, I had a brain tumor that was lodged between my optic nerves. And the only way to remove it was to have endonasal endoscopy through my nose, surgery. Big risk of being 100% blind when I open my eyes. Basically, there's risk. And so it was 10 hours of surgery. I came to afterwards and it looked like it had been successful. Recovery was very difficult. And then I had a major setback, which was come to find out, we didn't know it at the time, but I only found out after I went in to the emergency again that the cover that they had used to cover my skull had leaked. And so I had lost spinal fluid in my skull, substantially all, which means it should have been sudden death. another surgery later, and very, very challenging and touch and go recovery because you just don't know. You don't know if you're going to be able to make the right amount of spinal fluid timely to survive. When I finally found my way on the other side of it, though, and I was home, I really had to find my literal balance again, right? I had to learn one step at a time how to come back up, walk, one step forward, two steps back. And because so much of my face was broken, I was quiet more and listened more. So between those two, I slowed down because I had to, right? And I became an observer because I had to. And both of them were the entire experience is not something one would wish for, but it ended up being a gift. I always talk about life before and life after is so much richer, more authentic. I made really important positive changes in my life after that experience. Really, really supporting the idea that it was through that adversity that I became more in tune with my goals, what I want out of life, who I am. It was really because of that adversity that I learned all of it.
What do you think were the things that you changed when you're, like, talking about life before? I'm curious about 2 things. What helped you get through that period of time in your life? And then what do you think were the biggest shifts? I heard, like, the slow down and observing more, but, like, what are the things that you did differently or maybe prioritized differently after that event?
So I bet you're going to say, oh, that's a common theme in her life. But when I was diagnosed, I was convinced that I was going to make it. Like I would
Well,
have a
listen, I love this because
conversation
this
with.
is telling people something. Listen, guys, it's that belief piece. I think that is, and people might can say like it's a maybe a little bit of an optimism, but that like knowing of like I'm about to face this thing and I just have confidence that I don't know how this is going to pan out, but I just feel like I'm going to make it through. And that's what it sounded like that you had when you found out.
Yeah. So optimism is important and having hope is important, but I'm not saying it's baseless optimism.
Mhm.
I had an opportunity. It looked like, okay, I can succumb or I can, through believing that I'm going to do better, take all of those steps necessary to make myself feel better, down to having conversations with myself that said, and I would have conversations with too, where I'm like, you're going to go, I'm going to stay. You're going to go, I'm going to stay. Right. Who knows how that
Mhm.
impacted, but for sure, it was useful in helping me find my way through that ordeal. So, yes, it was going back to the idea of knowing and then I love having North Stars, right? So when I was recovering and it was pretty dire, for a while, I mean, I had a fever for a month. For a long time, had to be horizontal because they just wanted to make sure that I make my spinal fluid. So not a fun place to be. But I started having smaller visions and goals, nothing too lofty. So when I was home, I was like, oh, it would be great if I can get around the coffee table. Like that was a goal. And of course, it took a while. And then from there, I'm like, ooh, it would be nice to someday be able to go upstairs. You know what I'm saying? Like having smaller
Mhm.
things to look for, to have smaller wins was helpful. And as a result, the changes I made was, you asked that question. I made changes in the sense of now I had time to reflect. Because I had slowed down, I had more time to reflect. And that reflection showed more um, potential opportunities for me. One was when it came to the company and when I started going back and, started going back normal to the office, I now had a different point of view. Is this are we going in the right direction? Because I had paused. So I was asking, are we going in the right direction? Or is everybody on the same page? Because I could observe more than I had before. And those resulted in what I eventually, making enhancements. I'm bringing private equity. Eventually, those were the reasons. In my personal life, similarly, oh gosh, I'm just assuming things about people, but have I connected with people the same way I would have expected? Are there people that where more there and others that were not as much there? And what does that look like with the people that are more there? So starting to make relationships, connections with people that were more consistent with what I observed and enjoyed for myself. And of course, in my own case, more of self care came into the picture because it was clear, okay, the price to pay when you're not taking care of yourself is really high. So why don't we take a little bit of time all the time and check in and do right? I had always worked out. I wouldn't want to say I was always one that worked out, but not in other ways of slowing down, taking a little bit of time to myself. Those practices were very helpful. And believe it or not, they were very helpful in business. I ended up running a good sized business and growing it much bigger because I had those moments of pause. Because when you're running a company, you have three or four. We bought companies, like we had three or four companies running at the same time. They were at different lifespans, so it was complicated. And you can imagine how many questions and problems and challenges come your way. The ability to pause and be able to address them, not necessarily just calmly, but clearly, that is a skill. And I learned it because
Yeah.
of what I dealt with.
Yeah, because you went through that adversity. It just like you said, it sounds like it gave you that different perspective. And you know what? I think as I'm hearing your story, I do think about a lot of the individuals, we've had even on the show that have been more go-getters in life. I'm going to give them the go-getter. They have the vision.
Yeah.
They take the action towards the vision, whether it be small steps, like you said, over time, and they claim things before they even get there. It's themes that I hear in in conversations with other people. But and as somebody myself who likes to have a vision and take action, I will say the challenge is if you haven't gotten to a place where you've reached your edge, or like you said, you had almost that life-threatening situation that you had a confidence you were going to get through, but it sounds like it was not a quick recovery time. It wasn't like you just had this and got better a day later. It sounded like a period of time that you had to go through learning how to find balance again, literally, and then figuratively in life. And I think I'm learning. I haven't learned it yet. Okay, about the slowdown and the real ability and what a gift that is, especially if you are in positions of leadership and you have to make decisions. That you can make those decisions. I'm hearing you from like kind of more of really clarity of problem and not that reactivity place that I think a lot of people can find themselves in life when they're just running through life pretty quickly.
Yes. And I have to say, that's something you would practice. So I veer off too, still to this day. And I have to remind myself, remember, you know, it's better to operate the other way. So it isn't like we figure out a principle and we apply it perfectly throughout life. It's just
What? I
good to have the
wish.
knowledge.
Yeah, and that is hard. I'm glad that you said that and normalized that for anybody listening because I do know sometimes we have guests or we just talk about things on the show, and I'm sure some people might be listening and thinking, "Okay, that's great, but I just really have hard time with consistency in implementing these things that I want to implement in my life." And I love how you said that it's even if you have a life-changing event that shapes your point of view, it doesn't mean that you still have to later on in life go back and say, "Hey, don't you remember you might be teetering a little bit? What are those habits that you need to do to recenter yourself and give yourself space?" Or you look at that calendar and you might be like, "Okay, that's for a season, but what are you going to do afterwards to help yourself recalibrate?" Or even like me and you talked on before we got push the record button as you've been, talking more a little bit with the launch of your book and kind of having these conversations, it's like, okay, well, what things do I need to do for my own care throughout the day when days might be busy, and as you're kind of sharing a little bit of your story with the world.
And then you fall off, and that's okay. You just remind yourself and get back on. I think that's from what I've seen, and I've worked with a lot of leaders and CEOs, and it is not an uncommon thing. I don't think not anybody. Most people can say, "Oh, I figured it out and I dialed it in and I'm like that for the rest of my life." Like, I do feel like people fall off. People end up not necessarily listening to their own advice, knowing that that advice
100%.
exists and knowing those principles, bring it back on track. That's the idea.
Well, and I'm glad that you said that because let me go ahead and disclaim for listeners here. Y'all listen to this podcast. Y'all are hearing these conversations with me, and I might be like saying these lofty ideas that I act like I might implement in everyday life all the time. But the truth is exactly what you said. Sometimes the hardest challenges we have is to take our own advice that we're giving and doing it consistently. But like you said, it's just trying to give that space for reflection. I know if I can reflect, I typically can then make adjustments. But if I give no time for reflection, then I can just move through life and put all the good habits that supported me to be in a place that's a better place for myself and for others to be able to help others more on the back burner. So I'm curious, what inspired you to write the book?
It's very interesting. When I was in the last year of the company, Forbes approached us, and I thought they were there to talk about the company. As it turns out, they really liked my story, and then it ended up coming back and doing a video and then posted it on Forbes.com on International Women's Day in 2019 on the cover. It was the first time that my story was out, and I felt so exposed. But it started the conversation. After I
What is it,
stepped
that
down,
vulnerability hangover? Vulnerability hangover, I think Brene Brown calls it or something like that. Yeah.
sure, I felt it. And so then afterwards, when I stepped down and I was speaking at different events and conferences, I used to think that people want to hear about sort of the technical aspects of how do you do private equity? How do you grow a company substantially? I thought it was about all of that. And yet every time people kind of ask, well, tell me a little bit about your story. And in 2021, my children, Sam and Sarah, for Christmas, they were in their 20s, sat me down and said, you need to write your book. And I resisted. I thought, nah, there's no way. I'm not going to go there again. But over time, I came across circumstances and situations where I realized that by sharing not just my story, but the principles that are at play that I've learned, and I do believe there are principles at play when you grow, build, and accomplish and live your vision. I realized if I were to share those and the language that is used, and then the way that we can hopefully help others. If it's about that, then I can write it. So I sat down in the corner of the family room, and for 2 years, I wrote. I wrote everything by myself because I wanted to find those common threads. Like, what is it that I learned, and how did that become useful later on in life? Those threads exist in this book. The idea is this: I call it a roadmap that I wish I had when I was growing up. So it's inspirational. It is a storyline, but it's also insightful and instructional. And that was the idea. This is why I wrote it. It's about impact. At this stage in my life, my hope is that through all that I've been through, what I've learned, I can now help others build and grow what they desire. That's what it's about.
Yeah, I love that. What was that experience like for 2 years writing down some of these stories and really having to, just reflect on your own journey in a very real and, like, probably recalling some things that you probably maybe had even forgotten about. How was that experience doing that?
I say it was divine and daunting. Like it was both.
Okay.
There were there were points. One, again, I was trying to make it helpful to others, right? So I was trying to come up with what was it? What questions you asked today? Like, how did I land at this? What did that mean? What was the underlying lesson learned here? And so I had to reflect and be thoughtful. And then I bumped into places which, because of so much trauma I've been through, well, some of the memories are sketchy and not quite there.
Mhm.
So there's that. Also, some of them are very difficult. So what I would do from time to time is just like take a break. Like I couldn't continue writing at times. And I would give myself those times off and I would go back and start afresh. So it was a great process. It was a very personal process and it was a very rewarding process.
Yeah. What is your ultimate hope for this book for others?
My hope is that by people reading it relate to elements of it that they identify with, because it's a human story. It's a very relatable human story, and we all have so much in common. By connecting to those, my hope is that they see that there is the possibility exists in their lives, that circumstance does not dictate our destiny, that by applying some of those principles, maybe they find their way through what they want to do. If they're in some kind of a transition, if they're in a position where they want to grow something, whether it's a company or their careers or their lives, so that they generally take away from it that adversity is a superpower and it is possible because you can.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Shireen, I have a question for you. If you were to go back to younger you that maybe just was in Istanbul, okay, and you just had this situation where your mom brought you and then she got you set up in a house with these other girls and she left and you were to go back to her and give her one piece of encouragement, advice, words of wisdom, what do you think is the one thing that you would go back and tell her today?
Oh, that's a very good question. Nobody's asked that before. I would go back to her and say, good job. Good job. That you're even here and surviving it is by itself a win. We all, some of us more than others, can be tough on ourselves. I should do that. I should do this. I should accomplish this and that. And those are good. Those are goals. But sometimes the language isn't as supportive. So I would go back to her and say, you're doing a great job and keep it up.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good reminder to all of us, right? Because you're right. That I don't care how hard you work on this self talk and this inner voice and how much you've done the reflection or the work to really be able to sit with some of your experiences. It is hard to remind ourselves sometimes that, like, we've made it a lot further than we give ourselves credit for a lot of times. And just by the art of showing up through some really challenging things, or even if it's just a day that's not the best, that you really have made it a lot further than you give credit for. So I appreciate that. Well, let me ask you this. If people are like, okay, now I've heard the story, I am ready to go get this book because I know I'm ready to go get the book, or they want to connect with you more, where can they kind of find out more about you or be able to get access to the book, The Unexpected CEO?
Yes. The book is called The Unexpected CEO. So if you Google it, it's everywhere. Thankfully, I have a very good publisher and great distribution. So it's everywhere. I can be found on all kinds of social media with my name, which I hope you have it in your show notes because it's hard to spell, but Shirin
Yes, we will
Behzadi.
link it up for
And I
sure.
chose
Yeah.
if anybody doesn't know how to spell it, just put in the unexpected CEO and then you can copy the name from there. And of course, my website has a lot of resources, which is also my
Okay.
name.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I just want to acknowledge you, Shireen, for not only writing this book that was a work of heart, I would say, it sounds like, and it really took you, that journey over the past 2 years, but really believing that you can, which has then led you to be able to move through different adversities through your own life and then make those into possibilities. And not only you didn't just stop there, you didn't just stop with like possibilities for yourself. You really did do the work to say how can I continue to make an impact to also hopefully give some inspiration to others around me. And so I just want to acknowledge you for doing that and for showing up for all these people you've been trying to inspire since this is launched, to be able to hopefully get this message out about the book so that they can hopefully glean from the principles. And like you said, I mean, I always love learning from people that have gone before because I learned so many different things about their
Mhm.
journeys. And hopefully, I can learn some things ahead of time so I don't have to go through, some of the other challenges that, those principles that took them time, energy, and effort to learn. Maybe, like you said, it was the roadmap you wish you would have had maybe when you were at that gas station declaring, that you were going to be the leader of a big company one day.
Yes, Chrissy, one thing you said this reminds me before we wrap up, because you can. When it comes to this book itself, after I wrote it, I was like, okay, so what am I going to do? How am I going to find a publisher? And everybody said, no, not nowadays. You can't find a publisher. They only publish celebrities, blah, blah, blah. Well, because you can. I didn't believe it, and I found one. Not only did I find one, now that the book is out and I'm getting excellent reviews, I appeared on the NASDAQ tower this week. So there you go. You can.
You can. And congratulations with that, because I know that's pretty incredible. And it just goes to show you guys, listen, take it for Shireen, like you can do this. It's just not accepting no also as an answer, it sounds like. So even when people, it also sounds like there's another thing when there were naysayers in your life that were like, I don't know if you can do that. You kind of were just like, okay.
Don't listen.
Yeah, don't listen. Well, guys, if y'all are listening, y'all know I kind of give y'all a little wrap up thing that I'm going to be taking with me. And I'm going to take a lot of things, and I'm getting the book, and I hope you do too, because I know there's going to be some great insights in there to help you along this lovely journey called life. But just remember, I'm going to leave with what Shireen says. Guess what? You can. You just have to be able to believe that you can and take that next step. Until next time.
That's all for today on Inspiring Possible. If you found a little inspiration today, please go on over to iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you tune in to listen to leave us a comment and rate us. Also, make sure and link up with me at inspiringpossible.com to get the free Dream It, Write It, Do It workbook. And don't forget to follow us on social media and share this with anyone who needs to be inspired. Remember, if you can believe it, it's possible.